Steen door je ruit, want Amsterdam is poep op de stoep. First and foremost, I would like to thank our viewers, if they're still alive. The last time I did a video on Amsterdam Vintage Watches channel has been 9 months ago, I believe, or maybe even close to a year ago.
It's been too long.
It's been too long. Thank you for pointing that out. But we had to break the silence, especially because of your arrival. So I'm very glad and even grateful to have you here, Mr.A, Alessandro, also known as the better half of Avocado Vintage Watches. That's very unkind to the other gentlemen, but but I know you better.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you better.
Thank you for the warm welcome.
Have you been enjoying Amsterdam so far?
I've been enjoying and loving Amsterdam, as always.
Are you hungover from yesterday and the day before?
We are in the process of waking up our inner senses. No yoga this morning, but
let me speed that up.
We went to have yoga yesterday.
So to loosen the lips a bit, I brought you some Italian.
To start the day right.
Start the day right, I guess so.
Di Saronno.
It's not Di Saronno, you fucking idiot.
Amaretto.
Oh
same shit.
God. Dude, it's just it. Never mind. You're a terrible drinker. We saw that the previous 2 days, but
we never say no to a shot.
Anyways, let's start with watch-related content, because that's why the people are watching. Probably not, but anyways, you have a very interesting watch on your wrist. Can you please elaborate?
I just did that.
Can you please elaborate on what the Piaget Polo? Oh, now I spoiled it. Sorry. Now everybody knows it's a Piaget.
Oh my god. Well, luckily it's very identifiable. Yeah. So this is a gorgeous piece of gold. It's like a little lingot of gold, about 100 grams. I think this is the evolution of watch designs in the 80s.
Dude, it's a bracelet, moreover.
Yeah.
Just displaying the time, it's so cool.
It's almost like a piece of armor, but purely for your pleasure rather than your protection.
Yeah. And definitely also check out the one was worn by George Clooney in Casino, I believe. White
Casino,
one with a
yeah.
lapis dial. But this really fucking is an amazing piece. And I think it's really your kind of style. Because what do you focus on primarily when you're purchasing watches? Because you're not buying the average Submariner or Datejust or whatever.
So let's say our focus with Avocado, not only Mr.A, I guess like, thanks.
It's broken. Luckily, it's very cheap watch.
Service is cheap here. I would say the main focus is always finding watches that people say, oh, wow, I've never seen that before, and pieces of design that like stimulate me into other realms of art. So it can be like design of objects, of furniture, of cars, of art, and everything. So. And
I see
always a parallel.
Piaget is like a staple for that collection because they made very, very uncommon models, very cool designs, very small batches, very small quantities. So I think that's a brand that you probably like.
It's a brand that offers incredible amount of choice when it comes to design, and to me they were by far the best stone cutters.
Yeah.
So the choice they had of lapis, malachite, they used I think over 34 different stones. They had like falconite, they had like an incredible amount of stones.
I've been to the factory.
Yeah, me too.
In Piaget, and I was amazed by both their stone and their gem setting division, and also their gold division. Have you seen that?
Everything is aspired, like there's gold in the air, so they have
crazy,
to recycle all the air. It's unbelievable.
Amazing. And also they had these huge gold bars. And it was just, for me, it was fucking impressive.
Yeah,
I went there back when I was still at school. So we did a school trip, visiting Vacheron, visiting Piaget, visiting Breitling. But I was most impressed by Piaget.
By Piaget.
And I remember vividly the guy, because I was already more into the business side of things. So the gentleman that was giving us a tour, he basically said, so I asked him, like, okay, Piaget, it's dope, very small quantities, they often made piece uniques on request, everything. But I said, but okay, the resale value of Piaget, especially a factory diamond set or, it's terrible. So doesn't that bother you? He said, listen, the people that buy our watches, they will never sell it anyways.
Yeah,
so
that's the idea.
I thought that was fucking beautiful.
That's the idea. I think it was back in the 70s, 80s, it was a brand really for a niche kind of clientele, very artistic guys, like Andy Warhol had a lot, and it was really an intellectual kind of piece. Like if you knew, you knew. Piaget was really like the Cartier, but for even higher end. I often paraphrase it to the Swiss Cartier, whereas I see Cartier as very French in terms of jewelry and design.
And it's more affordable than Cartier.
Today, yes, it offers tremendous value. Take for instance this watch, I literally purchased it for, the deal was $100 less than the price of gold in that moment.
What?
So the guy
who sold it to you? What did you rip off this time?
Well, it was on a chat, and it was a gentleman in the States, and he's price was of gold I think was dropping a little bit, so to be safe he probably purchased it around gold value, and to be safe he said, I'll just sell it now that gold is quite high before it falls.
So for our viewers, if you would like to purchase a unique example like this or a very interesting example like this, how much would it cost you?
I think obviously I was lucky to get it for gold price.
And you're always overselling, so the prices are very high when you purchase at your place. So.
Yes, I learned there was this group of guys in Amsterdam that used to sell really expensive Datejust. Like if the market price was 4, they'd sell it for like 6.5. And I learned that's a very good way to incentivize
That's a good modus
clients.
operandi. So seriously, now back to the subject of this piece. Price tag is?
Price tag.
We can make a sale finally.
Yeah, around.
I mean, you're a horrible seller. I'm
Let's say
fucking giving you this opportunity to sell this watch.
Not for sale.
Mr.A, DM him. He will sell you this watch at a mere price of
6,500 euros.
You see his profit margin? That's insane.
Insane.
That is insane.
But it's not for sale, so it's alright.
Anyways, it's an awesome example.
It's cool.
And I'm wondering what you think about my watch, which I'm very fond of. I purchased it with my heart, not my wallet. Therefore, I overpaid. Something I do obviously also oftentimes with you.
My favorite.
He's one of the very few dealers
that he's lost money on.
In total. Like, sure, if I buy 10 watches from a dealer, there's probably one I'm going to lose money on. But I bought 10 watches from him and there's 9 I probably lost money on. So I'm very interested to hear what you think about this.
You're welcome, guys, for fucking him for once.
Yeah, now everybody
and not the other way around. Yeah, exactly. You know what?
The general opinion is people don't like me. So now, since you fucked me, they will probably like you. So
this is a beautiful Lemania.
It's a Venus caliber, idiot.
It's a Venus caliber.
He doesn't know anything. Venus caliber 179.
I actually had to tell him yesterday it was a Venus because he was like, I don't know, it's just a rattrapante.
Dude, it's on the site for over 2 weeks saying Venus 179. But sure.
Okay, this is a beautiful commemorative piece. I'm a big fan of Bayer as a retailer in Zurich.
One of the most important, historically speaking, retailers ever.
I've had the pleasure of working with them also, and I've sold them a few things to their museum, so I'm a big fan of what they've done. They've always maintained beautiful relationships with the brands, which I think is fundamental. And this marks, I guess, a moment of proudness for the company. You told me, I think they made...
My apologies, some technical difficulties. Remy is out of shape. He hasn't made a video for Amsterdam Vintage Watches in close to a year. But please continue your rant, your loving rant.
My lovely rant.
This incredible split-second Bayer. Oh, by the way, we were talking about production pieces. I think I made like a handful, half a dozen.
Yeah.
1982, Theodore Bayer himself commissioned these watches, and I don't know if there were ever commercially for sale. I know one sold in auction that was brought in auction by Bayer themselves. It was an auction held at Bar Lac in Zurich, and they sold it for charity, and I think it reached like 16k back in 2006. Obviously I had to pay a little bit more, but I think it's worth your money, because first and foremost we're talking about a split second. Second of all, I love the way the subdials are made with like the sunburst effect that is in sharp contrast with the dial that is a little bit of a grenade finish. And third of all, the bezel has like a step to it, and the step bezel is something I very much adore.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of design features on the watch that
I just don't like the move face though. It's a bit, it comes off as a bit cheap.
Finish. Yeah, but then again, the light blue color gives it a good contrast.
I do believe
there's a beautiful contrast to the blue, and this is a very old school kind of cliche for the moon face.
It is.
So it has a very like 50s retro vibe to it.
No, it's totally
good.
It's totally like the vintage feel.
Yeah.
But the way they polish the lugs also, because the watch hasn't been polished, it's new old stock. But the way when it came in, I was like, who did the polishing job on the lugs? It looks horrible because it's so flattened. But that is just the way they came, apparently.
It does not have a super well defined case, which is kind of cool because it blends all in.
It's nice, but the sharp edges on the bezel
obviously give it a contrast. So I think it all works in some way.
The Performance 5004, I guess, huh?
I guess so.
I mean, it's like we're asking 26k. To be honest, I paid more because I traded a lot of watches. I think I paid like 28k in watches. So in the end, if we make somebody happy at 26k, obviously I'm willing to let it go. Otherwise, which is more likely, I will enjoy it myself for quite some time. This is not very
for
commercial piece.
Many years to come. Yeah, but it's a very enjoyable piece, I must say, and definitely one you won't find around anytime soon. So it's also must be said. Does it come with your favorite box and papers?
But I don't think. No, I'm pretty sure they never even made a box and paper for this stuff. Why would they make a box and paper for when it was auctioned off in 2006? It didn't came either with box and papers. And you know I don't give a fuck about those things. Please do watch my latest KOV video because we still make videos there. It's about box and papers and about investing in watches, which is a subject that's frowned upon by many people like you and me. So how do you view investing in watches?
I think there's two kinds of investments. There's the personal investment you do, which is dedicating your time and, let's say, mental energy to learning about something. And that's one of the most beautiful investments you can ever do. Because in the end, like, if you don't live for passions or things that like make you happy, what the fuck are you doing in this life? I mean, for me, it's
listen to the guy. He's a fucking poet. He actually is. He wrote.
Yes.
Can I tell him?
He
wrote a poem about Universal Polarrouter.
Yeah, but well, it's not only a poem. It's like a whole booklet.
That's
it's ode to Paul Routers in the poem. You know, I had to start the book somewhere.
The poem was the cherry on the cake.
Yes, it's honestly very well thought out. And also I wrote a special poem for you in a book I gave to you.
I'd rather keep that to myself.
Yes.
It's a very private poem.
Yeah.
And it's written down in a book on a...
sexual...
Erotic
watches, yeah.
Yeah, so you can guess the subject of the poem.
Yes.
Anyways, please continue your investment talk.
And of course, I mean, we have to be, let's say, rational beings. Watches are not cheap items. I mean, some of them obviously go for big sums of money, and so we have to be careful about how we spend our money. I think it's only natural that people want to spend their money well, and one of the ways that we think in today's society money is well spent is on returns. And obviously over the years watches have been a great investment for a lot of people. I think of course today we have to like give time a much bigger framework. We're used to having like super compressed profits, like within a month almost people want to make money. Like no, that's not how it works. It also is the case that like
usually it's like you have to keep on to a watch for 5 to 10 years.
5 to 10 years, and then you know it'll make sense, and then you know in 5 to 10 years maybe you can say, oh, I could have bought this watch which has appreciated more compared to others. But you know we always have to remember that we buy what we love, and the part of the investment is also the enjoyment you get.
Yeah.
And of course, when you make your choice, you have to take all these factors into consideration. But
for sure, I do understand when people look at the resale value. Again, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So most people do the same on cars or stuff like that. But for me, it just strikes me as odd to let that be the decisive factor when you're buying such an emotional product.
Yeah.
And you don't think about the resale value when you're buying furniture usually, or like when you're buying clothing or shit like that. And a watch, most people hold that dearest to their heart, or it's sometimes conjoined with a very special event or a special occasion or a commemorative watch. And then why would you think about the resale value?
Because you never know in life. I think, it's definitely not a one-shot sort of consumer product. Like, a t-shirt you will buy, you'll use, you'll throw away. A watch you'll never throw away, unless it's like a swatch that breaks and it's something like this. But like, people tend to buy a watch for it to last. So of course there's a conception already in somebody's mind that it's not a throwable product. It's something that you buy and you keep for it can outlast all of us.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, I think it's great that a lot of people get to enjoy their watches, buy watches, and then after a couple years they trade it up against something different, or they sell it and they potentially use the profit to buy another watch
that they like more.
That is great.
Their tastes evolve, obviously. Yeah. But of course, it should never be your primary scope. And I think we saw a lot in the last year or so, 2 years, with all the modern stuff about people literally buying. It was almost like when Yeezys were going for like 2-3K for a pair of fucking 350s. It was like there was the same hype, I think, and it was the same crowd that was attracted, and it was a very money-driven passion for a little bit.
Exactly, and there were a lot of dealers all of a sudden in play, and many of them advertised their products as investment. So they basically said, you're not buying, this is literally, I took this slogan from a dealer, you're not buying a watch, you're buying an investment opportunity. I'm wondering now that the market tanked, especially on modern pieces, I'm wondering now how they can defend that.
What they tell their clients.
Dude, imagine you bought that 5711 from this guy when he was selling it at 150 or 180K, and you get half the value now. I would be fucking pissed, bro.
Yes, but then again, nobody put a gun to your head and said you have to spend the money.
There was probably same with stocks,
exactly. And I think everybody gets greedy in that moment. Like, I have private clients or people I've met, even young people who wanted to who thought that they were so clever making money in watches, and they would buy watches, put them on Chrono 24 in their collection, and they would just be like, oh look, I made 200K with my watch collection. I said,
everybody was a dealer all of a sudden.
Yeah, you haven't actualized, you just are basing yourself on hypothetical values.
Yeah.
But it's part of the process. It brought a lot of people in, brought a lot of attention to watches. Now I think it's calmed down, which is great. I think, for example, if we talk about investment, you buy gold here, you're buying 100 grams of gold. This is a no-brainer to me. There is a
watch like this.
There is a beautiful aspect. You have, first of all, you have the gold, and then you have the beautiful watch, and there's something very special about this. And overall,
but a watch like this doesn't drop in price either.
Exactly.
I mean, these watches are not, let's say, the primary focus of the people that were trying to make money on watches, because they were buying those Nautilus models, those modern Daytonas and everything, right? So it doesn't depend on a bear or bull market if this watch keeps its value. It will always keep its value, but it will never go like this, I believe. It will always be a little bit more steady.
Yeah, slow and steady wins the race, though, I think. Because at the end of the day, I stand behind every watch I've ever, touched or sold. And of course, there's moments in which, I don't know, AP was super hot, and of course, if a client really wants one and you source it for them, it's their risk and everything. But stuff like this, it didn't pop in the last few years, but it slowly increased through time, and I think there's something beautiful about non-fluctuating goods. These are, you have to find the right person, the right, also mentality.
Also, these watches are backed up by passion and by collectors.
Absolutely.
So the collectors are still out there. It doesn't matter if the prices go up or down. They want the watch like this.
Yes.
And for me, what strikes me as odd also is that, for example, when a 5711 was 150K, everybody was dying to get the watch. Now it's 75K, and nobody wants. Well, okay, most people don't want the watch anymore. Yep. So that also shows you they were not in it for the watch at all. You should be very happy it's now 75K if you really like the watch, because you're spending half the money on it now. So I think it really cleaned up the market a bit, both on the consumer side as well as on the dealer side. So that is a beautiful progress we're seeing, in my honest opinion. So therefore, I'm loving the recession so far.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah, definitely. you know, you think about certain models that were, you know, obviously, as things go up in value, there's this FOMO. A lot of people get this idea like, oh, I'm missing out on potential
like
profits.
the NFT stuff.
Yeah, you know, I'll buy into anything because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't want to be like the guy who has to pay 250K for his Nautilus.
But in the end, somebody's got to hold the bag. And everybody backs out, and you're still there with your Nautilus at 200K or whatever.
You know, there's a lot of guys who got left with the hot potato.
Yeah.
But this is also greed. I mean, people were like...
I wouldn't feel sorry for them either, in all fairness.
It's you win some, you lose some, I'm sure.
And in the end, you know, we stopped selling those Nautilus models because they were just getting too high, and we wanted to protect our client. Yeah. Even though I don't feel like it's my responsibility. If they're buying a watch at a certain price and they feel comfortable with it, it's not my. Neither is it my
it's a
possibility
choice.
to influence the price.
Of course.
However, I would feel somehow a little bit annoyed if somebody would buy the watch for 200K and they come back and I have to say, well, I'll give you 100K. It's annoying. So we kind of stopped. But we still had some clients who said, listen, I still need like 5726. We got one of them for like 160K, and I told the guy, well, it's a lot of fucking money. I wouldn't spend it on it, but if you really want it, I can get it for you.
Exactly.
And he said, yeah, sure, I just want it.
I just like the watch.
Then I'm happy. If you're happy, I'm happy.
Exactly.
And I think it comes down to if you pay the price that you think it's worth for yourself, you will never lose.
I agree.
Even if the market goes up, it goes down, it doesn't matter. You paid what you think it's worth it. And I just bought this watch from Mr.A. And I paid the price, or we paid the price, to be honest, Rutger actually closed the deal. Mm-hmm. But okay. But we paid the price that you will know all of the time. It doesn't matter the market, it's worth, the watch is worth the money.
I agree.
So therefore, I think you have to apply some sense for yourself and see how you can combine your heart with your wallet, in some sense.
Deep, huh? You really touched my heart with
Are you
these
going to
words.
put that in the next poem in the book of the Polar Router 2.0? So tell me, what did we buy here?
So this is a very nice Polar Router micro rotor. So this is, let's say, the second generation of movements. The first were bumpers, and then they moved into the micro rotor. This is a beautiful black glossy example.
Just to be on the micro rotor thing, the first watch I ever gifted to Ramon
was
we call him Soprano, right?
Yes.
So I gave him a pink gold
Polar Router.
I engraved micro rotor for micro soprano. He still has that watch, but he never wears it because he's schmuck now. He only wears day dates.
Because he's spoiled now.
He's spoiled. But it's a great watch. But please, I'm sorry to interrupt. Continue.
No. Yeah, so it's a beautiful example with the black glossy dial, with the gilt hairline. This was one of Genta's very first designs. You know, we're in discussion now because some people claim that he designed other stuff, and I agree. I'm sure at school he did design some stuff prior to joining Universal. But UG in 1954, they reached out to him and they asked him to design a first major watch that, you know, became a big production piece. And he designed the Polar Router, which was originally called the Polar Router, meant for the Scandinavian airline systems to cross on the first transatlantic flights from Copenhagen to LA. So they would fly over the pole, and so they needed a watch that was particularly resistant to strong magnetic fields. And so the Polar Router was born. And let's say this is like the main evolution of it with the micro rotor, which is a big movement upgrade. It's today used in a lot of important watches because it gives you the ability to have an automatic watch with, let's say, a lot of visibility on the main plates, on the movement. And yeah, overall, this is just, to me, a perfect mix of design. You got a beautiful lyre lug case, you got a gilt dial, you got loads of little design. You got loads of little design elements that just, you know, make you feel like you can stare at the watch for hours. And on top of it, it has a beautiful steel strap, which is very rare. Signed UG on the clasp, so that's plus.
So where would you say UG stands now? Because it's a real cult brand. I mean, it's not a brand you hear often, but all the watch lovers, vintage watch lovers, enjoy a good UG. And in all fairness, UG for me is very important because it's like drenched in my family. My brother-in-law When they got married, he got a Universal Genève tricot box.
Okay.
She gifted it to him.
Okay, cool.
My father got a tricot box for his marriage. So for us, the Universal is a very important brand emotionally. But please elaborate on where do you think it stands in the watch world?
So funny enough, yeah, we've spoken about UG in our past video. If you haven't checked it out, see it on KOV channel.
It's fucking beautiful. The philosophical video. Yeah. It's awesome.
I think UG is one of those brands that's completely supported by the collectors because it doesn't really exist anymore. It does, but like only on paper. Yeah, right? It's only on paper.
So weird. If you go to the website, they still display like 2017 new models or something like that, or 2000. It's so weird. It's like a ghost town on the website.
Honestly, yes, and they don't care to do much with it. But at the same time, I'm not unhappy about this because sure, the brand doesn't exist. But I feel like it's better that the brand doesn't exist and collectors can just love the right aspects of it.
Instead of being destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. They do like shitty watches today, like 99% of these brands. And then they would just try to remake their shit because they go into like a very heritage-based production, like a lot of these uncreative.
And I think it adds to the charm, like the mystery around it.
Exactly.
Like,
it's
what's going on. You can still service it though. They have a service
Technically,
center.
yes. They have a service center.
Or
they
you
have
need
an
to
office.
know the guys, probably, yeah?
I think if you send an email, they'll probably answer.
I got an extract of the archives even for the both three boxes.
Which I'm always been curious as to where they're getting these archives from, but apparently they do have some information.
There's a guy.
There's a guy.
Apparently.
There's a guy in Geneva. So the brand's beautiful. They made a lot of stuff and there's a lot of, beautiful designs, beautiful watches, incredible things. But of course, it's not on a collectible level. It's an entry-level brand, I would say, and they have some exceptional pieces. But
because
of course,
a tricot box like the Evil Clapton or shit like that, it still fetches over 20 grand.
Yes, of course.
And you have, of course, the Cairelli stuff.
The Milas, they have a lot of
boxes. They can go high.
They can go.
Bernardini has a lot, right, in Milano.
Exactly. Max was a big fan of UG because of also he loves Hermes. I'm sure you know. And UG was one of the brands that Hermes was collaborating with the most in the 1940s, 50s. So of course he joined the tour. He realized that if Hermes chose to collaborate with UG, it was clear that UG had some design elements that, spoke to that kind of French aesthetic, which I think is something very poetic and beautiful. And I think there are a lot of UGs, really a lot. You can find cheap ones for under $500, but you can find some incredible ones that even go for 100K, which is like the split second or the prototype dials and stuff like this. And I think over the years, people will go back to finding like the really exceptional models, and those will be absolutely like grail watches because on a lot of levels, they're using stern dials. Yeah. They're using,
a big downside though, like on the earlier watches, so without, for example, the Tricompax or the Unicompax, without the round pushers, and they didn't have the screw back case back, and oftentimes the case is leaked though. There are a lot of watches, a lot of UGs with either refinished dials or completely destroyed dials by moist. And the same for Brighton, for example, on even the 806 or 809, the bezel is just so loose oftentimes the moist would come in and you see a lot of the dials being destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I say there's a price point for everyone. There's a lot of UGs that go cheap but then the exceptional ones, the black dial ones, the oversized ones, the Spillman cases, the special dials, those, of course, as with anything, like, you can have 100 Air Compacts and maybe, you find one today in like perfect condition. But even like a lot of gold watches from the 30s, 40s, like with these very special, beautiful cases that are completely unpolished, there's a big difference. And I feel like, of course, for example, for me, I've always focused on finding like the absolute like best examples of UG that I put away in my collection, and those have been 1 out of 1,000 that you see you can put away. But
because I do feel like this is an exceptional piece, not to give you too much credit because I kind of had some shitty deals with you regardless. This is an exceptional piece, and I think we've had, back when we were selling watches like under 15K, I think we had like 20 to 30 Polarouters, but this has to be the nicest one we've ever had. So thank you very much for
I'm grateful to hear. It's an absolute pleasure. Couldn't think of a better person for it to go to.
Kind. So yesterday when we were at the restaurant, I posted online, if you have any questions to ask to Mr.A, please submit them. And many people did. Most questions were about if you like pineapple on your pizza. That was
Wow.
Apparently that's like a running gag or something for Italians. They hate pineapple on their pizza.
Oh, really?
Apparently.
Never heard of this.
But you like the shawarma pizza, right? That's a good one. And what
won't lie. There's a spot in Milan when I'm feeling not so Italian, I will go have shawarma pizza.
Furthermore, how do you feel about
not
Italy
bad.
not being part of the World Cup? Also very important.
Well,
I didn't make it up. It's fucking right here on my screen.
Skip that.
And
No. You know, actually, I'll comment on that. Italy wasn't part of the World Cup. This was the least emotionally invigorating. The final was amazing, but it was a very dry World Cup because we were missing.
For you, because you were not
for
in it.
everybody. Everybody said this. We were missing.
Everybody in your circle, because
we were missing some passion.
Anyways,
You could feel Italy was missing.
Bus,
So, yeah.
Vintage View. I don't know if you know the guy.
Vintage review.
Vintage View.
Vintage view. Yes, it's Bas.
Bus. Yeah, he was at the Rikketik. The Rikketik is the watch fair in the Netherlands. It's in Houten. I think it's 4 times a year or so.
I sold him a beautiful watch.
Exactly. So he wanted to know how did all the deals go there? Did you find some nice pieces?
Yeah, I found some exceptional pieces. Pocket watches especially.
He buys pocket watches. This is like a 60-year-old guy, like a
so
60-year-old
funny.
soul in a
We've already spoken
guy.
about this. But those are just for the collection, so that's all right. I don't need to be judged on those.
They're for the collection because nobody buys them, so you have to keep them in your collection.
So it's a permanent sort of...
Can you please clarify to the viewers, why do you enjoy pocket watches?
Okay.
Because I'm a big fan of watches, but there are very few pocket watches that excite me.
So the idea with pocket watches is, given the size, you're allowed to experiment much more with the design, especially of the dial. So what I buy with pocket watches is crazy dial designs and, you know, still pretty Art Deco, special cases, nice steel cases. So for me personally, I think just the sheer size of this dial, you know, these are objects that are not made to be really used much. It's just the pleasure of owning them and seeing them in hand, and you can really touch and feel. And, you know, it's a big thing to have in your hand. It's not like a watch that's like, you know, more tedious.
But the same applies to pocket watches as to, for example, Universal. 9 out of 10 are not important, are not interesting. And the problem is they're oftentimes in pristine condition. Why? Because they're not worn on the wrist. They're not on the outside. They're in your inner pocket.
Safe,
So we had like 3-4 people every week coming in with middle of the mall, without any offense, pocket watches that in their opinion were very rare because they're like 100 years old and they still look like new. But there's a reason for it.
Yeah, technically they're not so interesting.
But if it doesn't have a weird dial or an extraordinary case, or if it doesn't have an important name or complication, they're worthless. You can melt them down.
No, they're not worthless. But of course they're not particularly exciting. And it's like, I feel like
you're protecting your market. I like it. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's just a fun exercise of aesthetic, watchmaking, everything. So these are things that I put on the side. They're not particularly, you know, it's not a particularly complicated thing to put away. And I think, you know, personally, I apply my aesthetic values to these, and I find cool stuff like the ones you saw. And, you know, one day you just buy a few, put them aside, and then...
2 days ago was Rikketik. You purchased 5 pocket watches?
5, yeah.
I haven't purchased 5 pocket watches in my life. Well, probably I purchased 5 pocket watches in my life, around that number.
I don't know if you're proud of this, but...
I pride myself in that.
You pride yourself in that? Well, I pride myself.
It's called focus, my friend. It's called not buying into the cheap shit. No, just kidding, of course.
No, I know now Mr. has tasted the upper echelons of society, and he obviously...
people gonna love what you're saying, because that's exactly what they're saying.
He's changed. You know, 1 year later, I can say he used to be a humble, you know, worker. Now he's like a...
When was the first time we met, though? 4 or 5 years ago?
The first time we met was actually not even that long ago. I think it was 2020. We met 2019 we met in Geneva.
during the auction?
November 2019, we met in Geneva.
When you were on the side of the road in the middle of the night, we were driving by the car.
Yes, and I said 50 euros for a quickie.
This is not a fucking joke.
And you said, yes, sure.
You jumped out of the bush. We were riding at Ruderona in the car, and there was an Italian guy jumping out of the bush, and it was this gentleman.
Yeah, and I tried to steal his watch, but he had a really ugly, over-polished day date with no boxer papers. So I said, no, I'm not into that. Oh, sorry, overpriced day chest, and it was also over-polished.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, actually, it's convenient that you have all these talks about unpolished, and you don't care about this and that. It's what's your view on unpolished watches?
First of all, I'm asking the questions here. And second of all, if you want to hear my view on unpolished watches, you can check out my video on the KOV channel, the unpopular opinion ones. So, of course, it's a controversial topic. However, I do wish to apply it first and foremost to Rolex watches, Patek Philippe watches, like the popular watches, and especially, Rolex watches were bought to be used. So there are very few left in pristine condition. Sure, if you buy a little bit more of a uncommon cult brand, you're more likely to find, for example, Juvenia. You can find quite some new old stock unpolished Juvenias because it's not that uncommon. They weren't sold, they lingered in dealer displays for longer.
That's the thing,
but with Rolex, it's just very uncommon. And you've seen even your own guys, the Italians, they can do great jobs on the cases and they can make it appear unpolished. And then subsequently it's offered as unpolished, so they're basically manipulating the market with the term of unpolished.
Of course.
So that's my view, and I don't believe, I owned an unpolished new old stock example, and that was my 6541, and because of this I couldn't enjoy it, because I felt horrible wearing it.
And
I was like, somebody saved this watch for 60 years not wearing it. Who am I to wear it now, go out, go to the club or whatever with this watch? It's a museum piece.
Of course.
So I didn't wear it and I had to sell it, and I bought another one that's pretty beaten up, and I enjoyed that watch so much more.
Of course. I would agree. I mean, for example, this is an argument I have often, is that you find a technically unpolished, say, Submariner, run-of-the-mill 16610. You can see this is the original factory finish, but the watch has some scratches, has some buffs, it's used. But at the same time, you can see the factory finish. Yeah. And, I'm confronted with the choice. Do I tell my client, listen, this watch is like this, it's been untouched and everything, it has some scuffs, some buffs, but it's untouched. Or I can take it for a service, get the case all perfect, like the client will be like, oh my God, it looks new. And I think for me, it's important to educate people to say, prefer the scratched up version, because that's like, original, untouched and everything. But if you prefer to see your watch, because obviously you're spending 15K for a watch, so maybe you want it to look new.
Maybe you want to make your own scratches on it.
Exactly. Then at the same time, you can accept this. But
the only thing is, it's a good point about education, but what I wish to educate people about, I'm not against unpolished, I'm just against the way it has been used in listings on Chrono24 or whatever, in auction houses, because unpolished is not a condition standard. It can be unpolished and be totally destroyed.
Yeah, exactly.
Still it's unpolished. Exactly. Or it can have one polish, but still be as good as new. So then the question only asking if it's unpolished, it makes no sense. Determining the condition of the watch hasn't everything to do with being unpolished or not.
I think for me, technically, I only use it when I can clearly say the watch has not been brushed and it's not passed under a machine that like really has taken off layers.
Over-polished is a condition standard.
That's absolutely, yeah, of course. Like for example, this watch, I can clearly say it's been worn, but it's not undergone, let's say, a physical change for it to like look new again, or take away the scratches and everything. So I think for me, but of course there's conditions in which it might be unpolished, but it's been used so much like you can't even tell, because it's really
it's a thing I brought to the attention, I think 2 or 3 years ago, first time around, and people were very infuriated by my way of putting it, because I said, if you're just asking if it's unpolished, it kind of exposes your lack of knowledge.
No, but this is a very fair point.
And that is to protect the viewers. Because I know so many people just asking, is it unpolished? Because they read somewhere online, you have
that
to
it's
ask
important,
this.
yeah.
And then watch dealers are saying, yeah, it's unpolished. I'm like, dude, that's not the way it works.
But this is a very fair point.
And luckily, Eric Kool of Loop This joined me in this discussion on my side. And he, in the end, probably not because of me, but in the end he put a message out on Loop This, like, we're not going to use the term unpolished anymore because it has been overused and it's been used improperly. So that's something I really
respected.
I respect. I'm happy that he did that, because of course he's very influential, so that's a good sign for me.
And I think he's also a great scholar and somebody who's really gone deep into watches on every level. And I think it's something that at this point, I think there's one dealer in particular, if I can shout out Eric Wind. He's a good friend, and I think he has a very good approach to watches, in which he finds a lot of barn finds and watches. And we had this big discussion about, would you rather leave a watch with some scratches, some buffs, but in original condition, or, you know, give it a treatment so that you can bring back some really clear, crisp edges. And both of us are on the agreement that we'd rather have a completely original, untouched, with a certain patina on the case. I love that sort of dull, scratchy vibe, but that's me personally, because maybe I've touched and seen a lot of watches and I've developed that passion. I know there's guys who would look at it and be like, no, this is too scuffed up for me, I want it looking new.
I'm on the fence on this discussion, because I do believe that it's depending on the watch.
Yes.
For example, a Submariner, I would prefer it even scratched up. Like, if I would have a 5570 and a Milsub without any scratch, I would be like, this watch is worthless.
Yeah,
because it's not worthless. But you want to see the history.
Exactly.
You know, it adds to the charm. But let's say you have a Royal Oak or a Nautilus, especially the gold ones. For me, they work so much better when they're
perfect.
Just perfect.
I agree.
And you know, AP and both Patek, they deliver great laser surfaces, so they can polish it in a way it looks factory. And I would definitely prefer a Nautilus without scratches that looks like new, over a one that's totally scuffed up. But for a Submariner, for example, it's the other way around. And a Dated, again, I would like to have it pristine. So depending on the watch, it's also a discussion.
Of course. But I think, for example, just for me, and then on some gold watches, it is very, very difficult to give back the same light as they did have in factory. And especially with Dated myself personally, but I'm very, like, you know, obsessed with this. I really love gold as a material, and I've gone deep into also the study of everything. And I would say some Dates, when they're polished, they just lose.
They lose the charm.
A tone of yellow. So yellow technically is in 5 colors. You have from 1 to 5N. I think you know this. So usually a deep yellow is between 3N, 4N, 5N is almost rose gold. It's rose gold. So I think when you polish, you bring it from 5 to 2. Like, you lose a tonality, and I think that really kills the watch. So personally, I've tried to focus on finding watches that are unpolished, in my opinion.
But it also really depends on the compound of the gold.
Yes.
Because different years, I think modern Rolexes, they are made in this compound. For example, Everose, it's very color consistent. Whilst if you see the pink gold used by Rolex back in the 70s, if you sometimes you see 2 pink gold watches next to each other, and one is like deep red and the other one is pale red. It's totally different. So depending on the compound, of course. But I do agree, like this strong, deep yellow color, this like almost with a brownish hue because of the aging.
This is the best. When it tarnishes and really gets an overall beautiful aesthetic. Like, to me, that's what I'm looking for as a collector. You know, that's the kind of gold I would prefer. For example, this Bayer, you can see between the you know, these purple hues when the gold just develops its own character and patina. And this is the kind of, you know, mental discussions I would like to have when we talk about unpolished and everything. There has to be like a certain cohabity between the object and everything.
But again, it's a matter of opinion. So some people would like this, some people would like that.
Something else.
But the way it's phrased at the moment, it's like a watch has to be unpolished. Otherwise, I'm not buying it. And that's just the most stupid thing, and therefore I wanted to point it out in my video, and I did so online. But it got a lot of backlash, which is a good thing, of course, because it opens the discussion.
Yes, and we have to discuss about.
Yeah, and I'm happy about your contribution too, because I think it's really valuable for the viewers when they're buying watches.
I think, you know, you have to be like a rational. you can't like just tick boxes with watches. Like, okay, it has box and papers, cool. It's unpolished, cool. Then I buy it. Like, no, I feel like that, as you said, shows a lack of judgment and experience. You have to like put everything in perspective.
Correct.
Of course, if you're buying a pretty standard Submariner from the 90s that they made 1 trillion of course you can have a lot more, you know, you can say, yes, I would suggest buying one with papers, because personally I think at that point you have the choice. But the moment you step away from the, let's say 90s, and you go down even like 70s onwards, who cares about box and papers? Because to be honest, yes, 5513, I'd rather buy a perfect example that's as is, instead of like finding one with box and papers. And of course, it's always a plus, but it's not a discriminant factor. Of course,
it's a plus, but not at a 20% premium, in my honest
it's
opinion.
not a necessity.
Yeah.
So I agree. And for example, sometimes I've spoken to people about, like, you know, a very simple UG, for example. This moment, people ask me like box and papers, and I say, if you knew what the watch is, like, you wouldn't even.
Especially in watches like this, nobody's interested about that kind of bullshit.
But I think, like, you know, there weren't even box and papers as we conceive them today. Like,
that's the thing. For sure, I know this watch wasn't delivered with a Bayer box and Bayer certificate.
Exactly.
It's just this is the watch.
Or probably, like, you know, this watch you would get a receipt like you get from the supermarket. I don't know, like a bill, and like you're not gonna keep that. So a lot of this stuff is.
And I never, and in all my experience, all the people that I know, all the collectors I know, never not bought a watch they wanted because it didn't have a box with papers.
Of course.
Like, if you like watches, then you have to buy the watch. I like watches. I don't care about a cardboard box, and you know, sure, when it's there, it's nice. And if it's a modern watch and it doesn't come with it, I can understand somehow it feels a bit sketchy or iffy. But I fell in love with the watch. And
full stop.
Regardless if it has box or paper, it's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree. And I think, like, collectors today need to start to do their own research in some way, and also realize these are used objects. So of course they have a past life and a past service history, and I think all of that is like totally normal. And of course, like, just have an internal discussion with yourself, like, what you can accept, what you can't accept, and just live with your own maxims, right? You have to like say, okay, like, it's unpolished, but was the job done well or not? Sometimes it's done poorly, and I'm not attracted to that. Other times I've seen jobs that I'm like, you know, amazing. I'm glad that was done to the watch, because maybe the watch had a bad life, and if you restore it and you bring it back to a sense of, you know, beauty, today you can re-enjoy it as if it's, you know, back to its glory days. And I think you do a service also to the world by bringing back something. Like, for example, discussion we've had often, and this goes deeper into the unpolished, is dial swapping. Yeah. And I think if it's done with extreme logic, care, and
period correct, that kind of stuff,
and not only period correct, ideally have like really you know, a one-to-one relation. Like, if you have the same exact dial, one is new, the other is used. And you know, for example, we say this between our friends, it's like, if you find the perfect case, the perfect watch, and you make a beautiful watch today that, yes, sure, maybe it was worn with a silver dial and you put a black dial in, but everything is extremely well thought out. And you know, it takes a lot of learning and understanding to be able to do it correctly. You do the world a service, because you've put back into life something,
former glory.
You know, exactly. And it's a piece of art that, like, for generations we can enjoy, and that watch has gone back to.
But it's also a thin line between a Frankenstein and, you know, the saying applies, like, it doesn't matter what you know, it's what you can prove in court. And sometimes you can't prove a watch hasn't been born in that way. For example, many Rolex watches, I'm sure if Rolex would give out an extract of the archives, which they don't have, they don't see a date it was born with this dial or that dial. They can't see that. They don't have this information. They only have the information, okay, this serial number belongs to this reference, etc. But if Rolex were to have this information and people could apply for an extract of the archives, I can promise you 70% of the watches prior to 1990 weren't born in the configuration they're currently in. So either the dial has been swapped or the bracelet has been swapped. So somehow that's also accepted. And the same goes to, for example, with paintings or with cars, you know. It's much more accepted for a car to have obviously a tire won't last 40 years or 60 years on a classic car, and the same is for a bracelet oftentimes.
Exactly.
The bracelets weren't made to be, especially the
leather
riveted
ones,
or the leather ones, of course, but even
you
the
get a lot
riveted
of people
oyster
who
ones.
ask you questions like, is the leather band original? And you say,
Bracelet, it's 200 euros, dude. It's
I know,
not depending on it.
I know, but you'd be surprised by the amount of people who like have these expectations, and but I think
a leather bracelet, it will tarnish in like 2-3 years of wear.
And it's supposed to be changed, but I think we're gonna have more and more discussions about restoration, acceptance of. I mean,
which is a good thing. I like it properly restored. As long as it's disclosed also.
Yes, it has to be.
I think that's important. Of course, we have now the whole story about the unicorn Daytona, the white gold one, that was brought back to former glory by Mr. Montanari. And there are also opinions on both sides of the camps, which is also a very interesting discussion. But I think that comes at the right time, because somehow I do feel like restoration is a part of watches, and as long as it's disclosed and everybody's open about it, it's good to have the discussion. But the problem is, for example, with unpolished, it's just used against people that are gullible.
So what was the discussion again for because apparently they swapped
6265?
Yeah, they swapped.
Well, of course, the 6265 in white gold has definitely been made, because was one case in white gold. You can see it in the books. It has been made, no doubt. So the watch does exist.
And Auto found it, I think, with the reprinted dial, no?
Auto found it with a very odd black dial. It's not known if it's original, but people say it's reprinted. Exactly. But it also came with a steel bezel and steel pushers. And obviously Auto wanted to install former glory to the watch, and he found the right pushers and found the right bezel. Now Periscope, Jose, says, okay, but how come, where can you find a white gold bezel and white gold pushers? Because it's a piece unique. So how did Rolex have these parts like laying around, or how does this happen? And then later on it was disclosed in the catalog by Philips that it had the parts swapped, so they gave full disclosure on
the
parts. But then there was also questioning about the timing of this disclosure, because when it was first brought to light, it wasn't disclosed, and then people had some insights and messages about the dial swap, and then it was disclosed. So, I like to keep clean here, because I don't want to make any enemies.
No,
and it was an interesting discussion. Let's put it like that.
As always, the problem is this: if you're talking to people who are calm, perceptive, and they will listen to you, of course you have no worries about saying like, look, the watch was like this, we brought it back to its former glory. The problem is this, that today, if you disclose something, there's a tendency of like quick backfire, like, it's fake, and everybody goes crazy, and so there's not going to be the right discussion. So probably Philips had to take a step back and say it at the right moment and everything, and then it creates a backlash. But I personally am not a big believer of destroying watches for the sake of destroying watches. I mean, there's one white gold Daytona in the fucking world.
Yeah, embrace it.
Yeah, be grateful that that watch exists.
This is the find of the century, right?
Yes, really. Like, we should all be happy that, like, even...
And it was sold for charity.
Exactly.
But there were also some questions about that, which
my
I
personal,
know nothing about.
And for example, this is something we talked about, these cool prototype weird dials and stuff like this. They're fucking unbelievable pieces of production history. Maybe they were never commercialized. Maybe they were stolen from archives. Maybe they were taken from here, from there.
Maybe they didn't have dial feeds to ever mount them in.
Who cares? The thing is this, we should be grateful to have these things, because these are parts of the production and these are like one-off elements. And of course, today we have to be smart. And I personally think the best thing to do is, if you put a prototype dial, you buy the simple watch, you sell it with the double dial. This is the original factory one, and this is the prototype. You spend 100K just for the prototype dial. That's cool, because you're buying a production element that you're not supposed to have. I showed you the
prototypes yesterday, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think this is something that the only way for it to be accepted is to stop lying to yourselves. Like, it's who cares if it's original? Yeah. Like, you're buying the fucking dial. It's so cool.
It's a piece of history regardless.
And ideally, as dealers, I think something that we should all just agree is you buy the watch. I think Philips did this with a Tudor Monte Carlo with they sold it with a normal dial, and they had the prototype dial on the side, and you can swap them in and out. There's no lie about it. There's no oh my god.
But it starts with transparency.
It starts with transparency. We have to like, it's okay that the dial was loose. It's okay it doesn't have feet. Even better, I don't want it to have feet because at least I know it's really like a Sinter prototype.
Yeah.
You know, but...
Good point.
Exactly, you just find it, put it on the right watch, you explain it, you're buying an extra dial. Here's the original factory dial, so there's no confusion, no discussion. And at this point, everything is totally transparent and nobody can argue.
Well put.
If you want to spend 100K for a dial, that's on you. Nobody's putting a gun to your head, but at least you get to enjoy something super cool.
But in the end, it's all about, to conclude this interesting discussion,
For sure.
it's all about, first of all, your own point of view and your own opinion, and you have to put a price tag on that. If you don't care about that, the box and paper stuff, don't pay premiums. If it's very important, if it adds to the emotion for you,
pay premium.
Please be my guest, pay premium. Same goes for the prototype dial. If
they're not for everybody.
Exactly,
they're not for everybody.
But if it's for you and you're willing to pay 100K just for the dial,
that's
go
amazing.
ahead, of course. But the thing is, and what I think is very important, is to have these discussions and to make it more transparent to the people and also to educate it, so you can make an educated decision.
Judgment, exactly.
So you know what's up, and then you can decide for yourself if you think it's worth the extra 10% for box and papers, or if you really want unpolished, or if you want people to lie about being unpolished, or if you don't care about it, if you want some scuffs, that's all fine. Whatever your preference is, I'm not judging, whatever you want, as long as you know, as long as you're educated to make the right decision.
I think you couldn't have said it better.
Thank you so much. Do you want to bring some more to the attention, or are we gonna get some drinks out?
I think,
what the fuck? What is the Nutella shit doing there?
Just a little made in Italy product placement.
Are you being sponsored, bro?
Yes.
Well, you can see the pocket watches are not selling, so he needs to make some business with this side hustle.
Side hustles, yeah.
I hope you got nice money for the Nutella sponsoring.
Yeah, 50 euros, I think.
Well, that's not too bad. It's more than you made on the Ricketing Fair. Thank you so
So
much for
after that-
watching, and thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mwah. Grazie.
Grazie te. Guys, all the best.